Thank you, Dr. Thorpe. I now recognize myself for questions, and I want to start with the empty chairs in the room. We also invited Dr. Skipper from Nature and Dr. Horton from Lancet, both of which publish a significant amount of federally funded research. Dr. Thorpe, you're here, you showed up. Do you think your colleagues should have as well?
I do. I'm disappointed that they're not here.
Thank you. Before we get into some more substance, questions regarding some of the public statements, and again, we're trying to look at process here and how we can do things better in the future. But the first is, after our first hearing on the origins back in March of 2023, you tweeted, "One side has scientific evidence, the other has a mediocre episode of Homeland." We have heard from scientists, foreign affairs experts, intelligence experts that a lab leak is possible. Even recently with Dr. Fauci, he said it's not a conspiracy theory. The tweet appears to contradict your testimony today. Would you still put the same thing out today, or have you learned something, or why was that put out at the time?
No, as I said in my written testimony, I was not as careful expressing my personal opinions on my personal Twitter page as I should have. That does happen on social media from time to time. I've gotten off Twitter, and I highly recommend that because in addition to making my life better, I don't have to take my blood pressure medicine anymore. So my doctor is very happy I got off of Twitter also. Yeah, I apologize for that. That was flippant, and I shouldn't have done that.
Well, I appreciate that. So let me ask another question. In an editorial published November 12, 2021, you were discussing the recently revealed diffuse proposal, the one where EcoHealth, UNC, and the WIV proposed inserting furin cleavage sites into novel coronaviruses. You wrote unequivocally these experiments were not concluded. How did you know that they weren't?
Yeah, well, opinions that I express on the opinion page are very clearly marked as opinion, as you alluded to in your opening statement. We publish opinions in Science because we like to provoke discussion about them, and every 2 weeks I have to come up with 720 words of my opinions to put on there, and that was a topic that people were certainly interested in. I was not aware, especially of the information that your committee has since obtained about that grant, and I understand why you would be so interested in all of that. At that time, I was going from what was reported in news stories that were around. That's what opinion journalists do. We read news stories and we write commentary based on those opinions. So at that time, I concluded that it was a proposal that wasn't funded, and there are many proposals that are not funded in science. And so something that was not funded, I didn't see as significant as some people did. I understand how you could see it with circumstantial evidence to support some of the things that you're looking for. And I was critical of both the way that Dr. Collins and Dr. Dashik handled the revealing of that proposal. And I certainly wasn't aware of something that I agree with you is very important that you've only recently uncovered, and that is that Dr. Dashik may have had other plans other than what was in the proposal. Now, I think it's also true that the viruses that they were talking about were not close enough to COVID that those experiments themselves could have led to the pandemic. But it's certainly true that they were discussing all of those things in that proposal. And I got, no one that I mentioned in that editorial was happy with me after I wrote that because I criticized both parties.
Yeah, I mean, when you say one thing in your proposal, but in your private comments, you're talking about doing something different, it raises an eyebrow about
I was not aware of that at that time.
Neither were we.
Yeah.
So, thank you. Dr. Thorpe, in your opening statement, you walked through the editorial process, and I greatly appreciate that. I thought it was a great statement you put forward, and I appreciated your candor. You mentioned 2 COVID origins papers that were pre-printed and eventually peer-reviewed and published in Science. Well, what's the standard practice for preprints? Are they submitted to Science and then published online, or vice versa? Take me through that.
Yes, this is very important for your committee, and it's a very important part of my life, so I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to walk through it. We used to live in a simpler world where preprints didn't exist, but they've made all of this in some ways better and in some ways much more difficult. So it's common for scientists now to take the version of the paper that they are likely to submit to a journal and put it on what we call a preprint server. And on that preprint server, anybody who wants to can look at it. The primary purpose of it is to get the information in the paper out to the scientific community so that other scientists can benefit from what they have discovered. And that part of it, you know, I really like, because our process can take a long time sometimes, and it's a reasonable criticism of scientific publishing that we tie things up too long while we're doing all those procedures that I described to you. So the preprint is a mechanism for solving that problem. However, it creates a lot of complications because the media can cover those preprints. The preprints can get into the public discourse very easily. And then, and this was certainly true with Warraby and PCAR, as those papers are improved during the scientific process and even afterwards, because sometimes we have to adjust papers after the fact, none of that is in the record that's on the preprint. And this is one of the main reasons why journals are important, because not only do we evaluate and improve the version itself, but then afterwards we're responsible for any comments and criticisms and adjustments in the paper that have to be made after the fact. So the benefits of the preprint are that the journals aren't holding up the world from getting scientific information. The drawback is it makes the whole thing noisier. And so there are a lot of people in my line of work who long for the day when we didn't have preprints, because it made our jobs easier in that respect.
I appreciate that. Before I go to the ranking member, I just want to point, these two papers were the subject of front page spread in the New York Times. And one author quoted saying, when you look at all of the evidence together, it's an extraordinarily clear picture that the pandemic started at the Hunan market. But that's not what the paper ended up showing, and you pointed that out in your opening statement. I appreciate that. And it seems that these studies, much like Proximal Origin and Lancet Letter, were used to stifle debate. I now recognize the ranking member for 5